Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, the team needs to find a way to come up with some more turnovers, get some interceptions. Could Marcus Peters be the answer? We'll talk about that plus a whole lot more on Tuesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, May 16th, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest edition of the show. And, of course, if you're checking us out on YouTube, we do appreciate you. If you're checking us out for 5 minutes or 35 minutes, we appreciate that in a major way. And, of course, my man Ari does a fantastic job making sure we're up on YouTube each and every day at Ari Produces on Twitter. And you can always follow me, your boy Q, at your boy Q254 on Twitter as well if you ever want to chime in on the show. Of course, we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. You can leave a message or you can give us a text. Either way, we'll get that on the show coming up in segment number 3. Segment number 2, we'll talk about turnovers and interceptions and how the Raiders need to make sure they do a better job of that coming up in 2023, moving forward to give that defense and give the team a chance to be a really good team in 2023. But here in segment number 1, want to get into news and notes of the day. And the Raiders made a couple of little roster moves on Monday. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. And off top, the Raiders signed third-round draft pick defensive tackle Byron Young out of Alabama. And this is just another one of their draft class members that I told you will continue to get these guys signed sooner rather than later. Before it's all said and done, they'll all be signed. Now they've gotten everybody signed except for fourth-round pick Jacorian Bennett. And I would not be shocked if sometime today you get a notice or the Raiders send out an email about Jacorian Bennett signing his rookie deal. Again, it's a lot easier. I say this each and every time I talk about these rookies signing their their contract. It's a lot easier to get these guys under contract now than it used to be. So Byron Young, I'm very excited about the defensive tackle out of Alabama, the third-round pick. I think he's just going to be a really good player. I've been talking about him for quite a while, but the more people I talk to, the more research I do, the more people that cover the NFL like a glove keep saying that this dude, they expect him just to be a 10-year starter in the NFL, just a really stinking good player. He's not going to be some Aaron Donald type guy, some superstar that's, going to end up breaking the bank on multiple contract extensions because he's that stinking good and just, a game wrecker. But he's going to be one of those dudes that you need. You need that kind of cat along the defensive line. I just believe Byron Young's going to be that dude, and now they got him under contract. Young, 6'3", 292-pound tackle out of Alabama. He was selected 70th overall in the 2023 draft, played in 54 games with 26 starts over 4 seasons in Alabama, had 138 total tackles, 22.5 tackles for loss. 22.5 tackles. 56 solo tackles, 22.5 tackles for loss, 8 sacks, 3 passes defense, 1 forced fumble, and 1 fumble recovery. That is the little kind of write-up that the Raiders sent out with the notice that Byron Young signed his rookie deal. Also, the Raiders signed free agent wide receiver Christian Wilkerson. And, of course, as soon as I say free agent wide receiver, everyone rolls their eyes and says, what in the world do the Raiders need another wide receiver for? They now have 11 wide receivers signed to their roster currently. And remember, their roster is at 91. Only 90 of them count against their 90-man roster. They've got to be at 90. They are at 90. They have the international player as well that makes 91, but he doesn't count against their numbers. So they're sitting there at 90. So after they signed Christian Wilkerson, they had to make a move. They waived wide receiver Tyler Johnson. But more about Wilkerson. He originally signed as an undrafted free agent with the Tennessee Titans in 2020. He spent the last 3 seasons where? With the New England Patriots. So he's appeared in 4 career games with 1 start. He has 4 catches for 42 yards and 2 touchdowns. So nothing to write home about when it comes to Christian Wilkerson. He's going to end up being most likely just a camp body. I don't expect him to be anything more than that. Hell, he might not even make it to training camp, right? There's certain guys that are going to be on the roster right now. Then all of a sudden a guy, the Raiders decide to sign a guy to a contract and they have to make a roster cut. Wilkerson could end up being that guy. He'll be one of the first guys released. So he's not one of those guys that you got to get all up in arms about and be like, wonder why the hell they're signing this guy. Look, he's just a camp body at best. Maybe they find a spot for him on the practice squad. He's a guy that's familiar with what Josh McDaniels wants to do, obviously with his time in New England, but don't think you'll see too much more from Christian Wilkerson. So just kind of like a side note, but he is signed to the Silver and Black, and wide receiver Tyler Johnson was waived. And I mentioned maybe the Raiders go out and sign somebody else that would all of a sudden take up a roster spot and they'd have to release somebody. Well, how about cornerback Marcus Peters? According to Vic Tafur from The Athletic, he actually visited with the Raiders on Monday, and Marcus Peters is 30 years old at this point. He's not Kansas City Chief Marcus Peters. He's not even LA Rams Marcus Peters. He's now Baltimore Ravens Marcus Peters, who missed all of 2020 with that torn ACL. He's had 10 interceptions and 29 passes defense and 3 touchdowns since 2019. But in 2022, he had a career low with 1 interception and 6 passes defense. He's been a ball hawk for most of his career, and if you look at the Pro Football Focus numbers that I'm looking at right now, he allowed career highs in completion percentage, 71%, and touchdown rate on throws in his direction. In year 2 off the torn ACLs, it's possible he could bounce back, as that tends to happen with players who suffer that kind of an injury, but clearly Marcus Peters is starting to slow down just a little bit. But the one thing that he does have is something that the Raiders don't have much of, and that's ball production. The Raiders had 6 interceptions all of 2022. Marcus Peters, I realize, only had 1 in 2022, but 10 interceptions since 2019, 3 touchdowns since 2019, and 29 passes defense. He's a guy that's going to get burned sometimes. He's going to make some big plays for you sometimes. And maybe coming back from the torn ACL for the second year removed, maybe that makes him a lot better. Who knows? But as of Monday, he visited with the Raiders. No sign on if he's actually signing with the team or just, the Raiders are kicking the tires on the man out of, originally that was a Kansas City Chief, drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs out of UW. I'm always a big fan of that whole secondary and that roster there at the University of Washington. They had a lot of really good players that entered the league, including Marcus Peters. So he's always been a really good player. Who knows what he has right now left in the tank, but I'm sure if the Raiders were interested in him, they definitely gave him a physical to see where he's at. But with that being said, we're actually going to continue this conversation in segment number 2 and not necessarily just talk about Marcus Peters, but talk about the fact that the Raiders need to find a way to create more turnovers, get interceptions, get the ball back to their offense. They did not do enough of that in 2022. They haven't done enough of that in a very long time. So we'll talk about what Marcus Peters could bring to the table. We'll talk about what current Raider actually approved of Marcus Peters being visiting with the Raiders, and sounds like he wants them to sign with the team. But we'll do all that coming up in segment number 2 after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. And right now, it's a perfect time to make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs. We know who the Final Four is, right? We got the LA Lakers, the Denver Nuggets, you got the Boston Celtics, and the Miami Heat. Who's going to be battling it out in the finals for the Larry O'Brien Trophy? We'll find out sooner rather than later. But right now, all new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to talk about what the Raiders really need. We've been talking about the defense quite a bit. Of course, the draft has came and gone. They addressed the secondary a little bit with their 4th-round selection, Jacorian Bennett out of Maryland, and, of course, Christopher Smith, the safety out of Georgia. They signed a couple guys in the secondary as far as free agency goes, and they've done a little bit of an overhaul of the defense. Is it exactly where it needs to be? Probably not, and it's going to take a little bit of time to gel, especially with as many rookies as they drafted. 6 out of 9 guys they drafted on the defensive side of the ball. But they've got to find ways to take the ball away. They just don't do enough of that. And when we talk about turnovers, we could talk about fumbles. We could talk about strip sacks, like Max Crosby could do a better job with that. Chandler Jones could do a better job with that. But I like to talk about takeaways in the secondary. The safeties coming up with interceptions, the cornerbacks coming up with interceptions, even linebackers coming up with interceptions. In 2022, the Raiders only had 6 of them, and they came in pairs. Jerron Harmon had 2. Denzel Perryman had 2. And remember Denzel Perryman's big knock? Oh, he's not very good in coverage. Well, he had 2 interceptions in 2022, and then Amik Robertson had 2 as well. And that's it. Those 6 interceptions by those 3 guys, and 2 of the 3 aren't even on the team this year, right? Jerron Harmon is not currently signed to any team, and Denzel Perryman is currently a Houston Texan. And Amik Robertson, well, he's still with the team. That's the only interception production that comes back from the team last year is Amik Robertson. So, of course, this conversation stems from the fact that Marcus Peters was visiting with the Raiders on Monday. And, again, I don't know if he's going to sign or not, and I don't know how much he has left in the tank. I'm not saying he is the end-all, be-all answer, but the point is the Raiders need to find guys that they can have in the secondary that can create turnovers. They haven't had that guy in so long, right? It's been a very long time since they've had someone consistently be able to get their hands on the ball. Of course, Charles Woodson was able to do it throughout the course of his career, and even when he returned to the silver and black, he was able to do that. Reggie Nelson did that from the safety position, and he was frustrating because he would get burned quite a bit, but then he'd come up with the play. And that year that the Raiders went to the playoffs in 2016 when Khalil Mack was Defensive Player of the Year, Reggie Nelson had a bunch of interceptions. And their defense wasn't great, but Khalil Mack came up with some big plays to finish games and close games out towards the end all the time, strip sacks or just sacks in general. And Reggie Nelson came up with a bunch of interceptions that, like I said, got the ball back to the offense more times than not. So that was very instrumental in the Raiders winning a bunch of games, was the fact that they were able to create turnovers. They haven't been able to create turnovers in a very long time. It doesn't matter who you put in the secondary. You'll get a guy, one interception here, one interception there. Like Jerron Harmon, he had 2. And he was a guy that I was very excited about in 2022 because he's a guy that just has a nose for the ball. He just kind of always is where he needs to be. And there was times he had opportunities to come up with more than 2 interceptions. He just only came down with 2 of them, which still was tied for the team lead. But, of course, 6 is not enough. Like Eric Allen has told me multiple times that when he would go to camp, his defensive coordinator, who was Willie Shaw at one point with the silver and black, would say, hey, 20 interceptions. As a defense, we need to come up with 20 interceptions. And I'm looking at what the Raiders did in 2022 and know that they only had 6. I'm not going to say that 20 is the number that they should have because that's more than doubling what they did the year before, and that's probably unrealistic. But as someone pointed out to me on my radio show on Monday, 6 interceptions is unrealistically low. Like that's just something that just can't happen. They didn't have enough sacks in 2022, and they didn't have enough turnovers, create enough turnovers, including interceptions in 2022. So you're hoping, at least I'm hoping from where I'm sitting, that, you know, the defensive help from a Tyree Wilson, from a Byron Young, from other guys that they brought in to address the issues on the defensive side of the ball can, 1, help them get more pressure on the quarterback, and 2, help the corners and safeties come up with a few more interceptions by making the quarterback rush the throw. If that happens, great. But you know, we'll see if it happens, and especially with rookies, it's going to be hard to get them to expect them to go in and be those guys immediately. Some, it clicks pretty quickly. Others, it takes a little bit of time to figure out exactly what they're doing. I mean, think about this. Go all the way back to Nnamdi Asomugha. How long did it take before he came up with his first career interception, and then all of a sudden he just kind of broke out? The very first year he had an interception, he came up with 8. Like, that was a fantastic year, and then the league was like, oh, yeah, we're going to stop throwing his way because he's really good. I think he ended his career with 15 total interceptions, and the first year he came up with any interceptions, he had 8. So he had more than half his career interceptions in 1 year, and then the league decided, well, we're going to stop throwing his direction. So, again, Marcus Peters came in with a visit with the silver and black on Monday. I would have no problem if the team signed him if they found that, 1, he was in physically good shape. They thought that he was, you know, the second year removed from the ACL, he was going to be a lot better. And 2, if the money wasn't a whole lot. You know, Spotrac.com has him around $9 million a year is what they expect him to sign a deal for. I would look at about half of that. That was actually a number that my man Damon Cotton suggested on Raider Nation Radio 920 Unnecessary Roughness on Monday. He said, man, $5 million is probably reasonable. And I don't know if that's what Marcus Peters wants to, you know, sign for. He might be looking for a better deal than that. But I think at this stage of the game, at 30 years old, and knowing he's coming off a career where he only had, or a career low year, where he only had 1 interception, and he gave up a bunch of passes, got beat more times than he didn't, I think that that's where they should be. And the one thing I can say about GM Dave Ziegler, what he's proven so far as his time with the Raiders as the GM, is that he's very disciplined. He'll have a certain amount of money that he's willing to spend on a certain player or a certain position, and he'll stick to that. Regardless if the fan base likes it or not, I was pounding the table for J.C. Jackson last year, right? I wanted them to go out and sign the big free agent, get the big free agent corner, Mr. INT. He's going to come up with all these interceptions because why? The Raiders have needed that for so long. That's why I keep pounding the table to go out and make plays. That's why I wanted him to go out and make a move for Emmanuel Forbes in the draft. That's why I was looking at, you know, guys like Christian Gonzalez and Devin Witherspoon because they have ball production. It's just one of those things that you have not seen enough of from the Raiders. I mean, you can go all the way back to, before Eric Allen and Charles Woodson were bookends, who do they have? Like, they had, I'm thinking right now, hold on, Albert Lewis and Terry McDaniel. Remember those guys? Before Charles Woodson was drafted, like those 2 corners that they had that were actually pretty good were Terry McDaniel and Albert Lewis. Of course, back in the day, they had, you know, Lester Hayes and Mike Haynes. And, you know, the Raiders were always notorious for having really good corners that came up with ball production, came up with the ball, took it the other way. that run of great corners, of course, Willie Brown, great corner, right? Eric Allen, fantastic corner. I mean, they've had some dudes. They just haven't had some dudes in a while. So whether it's Marcus Peters for a year or two, I'm thinking that if they were to sign him, it'd be probably a 1-year deal, maybe a 2-year deal, but it's really funny money, and the only year that's guaranteed is the first year, and then they could just let him walk for, basically nothing on the dead cap. I could see them doing that. I wouldn't mind if they brought back Deron Harmon, maybe to be a mentor to a guy like Christopher Smith and try to help bring him along. And then a guy like Trayvon Merrick, I think he needs to step his game up, right? A guy that I was a big fan of coming out of TCU, thought he was going to make some plays on the ball. He's had 1 career interception and has probably had about 5 or 6 good opportunities to come away with balls, and he either puts them on the ground or just doesn't make the play. He's got to find a way to routinely make the play. The Raiders have to. And I mean have to. If this defense is going to take a step in the right direction, obviously more than them coming up with turnovers has to happen, but that would be a major help. Max Crosby needs to get help from the back end, and the back end needs to get help from Max Crosby. He's got to get home, more times than not. Of course, he had 12.5 sacks in 2022. He needs to repeat that performance, maybe even have 15. Right? Step it up to that level. Tyree Wilson, the rookie out of Tech, he's going to have to step up and play a role. Chandler Jones is going to have to be better than he was in 2022. I mean, again, I've mentioned it. We've argued it before. What's more important, the corners or the line? And I say they work together. It's critical. It is absolutely critical that they work together this year and try to improve that defense. You want to find ways to end games, close out games, come up with a big turnover. Turnovers are deflating. Takes the life out of the opposing team, sets up the Raiders in good field position, gives them a short field and another opportunity to put more points on the board. And they have an offense that I do believe, with a healthy Jimmy G, and of course that's, a big if he's going to stay healthy, but with a healthy Jimmy G, can score points. They have the dudes to go score points. They've just got to find a way to get it done defensively. And one major way is going to be coming up with turnovers. Like I said, if that's Marcus Peters, so be it. Right? He's going to frustrate you at times because he's going to get burned, but he's also going to make plays. So I don't know if he's kind of like a give or a take, right? I mean, if you come up with, 5 interceptions in the season, 4 or 5 interceptions in the season, you give up a couple touchdowns, it's almost like you'll take that at times because they just don't have enough turnovers. But they've got to have someone that could be sticky in coverage. Can that be a Jacorian Bennett out of Maryland? You're asking a lot for a 4th-round pick to all of a sudden step up and learn the game that quickly. I think he has an opportunity to be good because he does have that ball production, but the NFL is a different ball game. And he's going to, like I said, going to have to learn the speed of the game sooner rather than later. And Christopher Smith is going to have to do the same thing as the safety out of Georgia. But it's a start, and if they could start to consistently come up with the ball, that's going to help this defense be a lot better and this team ultimately be a lot better. We've been talking about wins and losses based off the schedule. We could talk about wins and losses based off of turnovers as well. So, like I said, we'll see what happens in the next day or so. If Marcus Peters is, in fact, a guy that the Raiders are eyeing. Max Crosby, he showed his sign of approval for Peters in an Instagram post saying it's only right. So he's saying, okay. Max Crosby told me right after the season that the team needs more dogs. At one point, I would look at Marcus Peters and say he's a dog. I don't know how much of a dog I would say he is right now, but he has had the production in his career in the NFL. So that's what I got for you. Coming up in segment number 3, your calls and text throughout that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. This is the Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start off with Raider X. He's calling to talk about the schedule and had a question about the talent on the team and where the Raiders might have dropped off, if any, from a year ago. Here he is, Raider X.
Hey, Q, this is Raider X. I just wanted to call in on reflecting back on the schedule and give some thoughts. The whole numbers, I kind of agree with you about the whole 9 or 10 wins. I got a real problem where it's confusing of, where did we really lose or go down or downgrade in a position of strength? I got the argument with Derek Carr, but then again, you look at it, he did a lot with his arm, and he actually performed pretty well. I mean, the rating of the overall offense is pretty good because he made some really timely and big throws, but also there was a lot of mistakes and miscues because of the system, and it's kind of a trade-off. Jimmy G's not going to do some of the bigger plays that Carr was doing, but he's also not going to make as many errors because he has, at least knowledge of the system, or at least he has the foreseeable ability to work in the system. And then, Waller, how much did he really play? And sometimes you lost a lot of the productivity because it was pretty predictable when he was at the line that it was going to be a pass play because he wasn't in there sure to block or to even do pass protection. So, there's the dynamics. And then defense, what do we lose? Perriman? I don't know. I like to hear that. And then one of the callers called in about Renfro. And I'm a real big Renfro fan. But the thing is he a route runner or is he a guy that has the knack just to juke and really get open downfield? I think the latter is the case. Unfortunately, I think he just has that ability to get open because he has some slippery moves. And maybe that takes too much time, and the efficiency is trying to get that ball out and gone too quickly, and that's what makes him obsolete in this system. Just waiting to see what everything turns out to be. But Raider X out. Go Raiders!
Thanks so much for the call, my man. I appreciate you, and I'll say that the defense to me should be better, right? The Raiders gave a lot of attention to the defense. They signed a bunch of, 1-year guys, 2-year guys on defense in free agency. They drafted 6 out of 9 guys in the past draft in April on the defensive side of things. But the one caution I have is that those guys aren't going to come in game 1 against Denver and all of a sudden just play lights out. Right, it's going to take a while for them to gel. It's going to take a time for the rookies to learn the NFL game. So you just got to have to deal with that. And you're going to have to hope that the Raiders offense can kind of carry the load for a little while as they're starting to, come together. And we'll see during training camp what they start to look like. But until the Bullets are live and, the games are for real, the lights are on bright, then we really won't know. Renfro, he's definitely a guy who finds a way to get open. I'm not necessarily going to say he's the best route runner, but he finds ways to get open. Somehow, some way, he's going to do it. So, again, I've mentioned it multiple times. There is a world where Hunter Renfro and Trey Tucker could be on the team at the same time. They could coexist. I would love to see Hunter Renfro on this offense with Josh McDaniels because, well, you've seen it in the past in New England, what it could look like. And I think Hunter Renfro could be better than all those guys that had success in New England coming out of the slot. But he's got to be healthy. And he's got to understand what Josh McDaniels wants to do. Waller, as you mentioned, was injured most of the year. He's now in New York. He's actually going to be wearing number 12. I found that out on Monday at the Aces Media Day when his now wife, Kelsey Plum, was wearing a necklace that had number 12 around it, and her jersey number is 10. And I didn't ask her about it, but my buddy Willie Ramirez was asking her about the number, and she said, oh, that's going to be Darren's number in New York, number 12. So that's going to be a little different, seeing Darren Waller out there in New York, and he is coming to Allegiant Stadium this year. You'll see him wearing number 12 instead of number 83. But back to the tight end position, Mayer is definitely a tight end that Josh McDaniels likes, right? He's very, some say, his nickname is Baby Gronk. Some people have called him more like Jason Witten. Either way, both those guys are Hall of Famers. I'm not saying Mayer is going to be a Hall of Famer, but he's a guy who could block. He's got sure hands. He's really good in the red zone. So he fits in with what a Josh McDaniels offense looks like. And it's funny, I talk about, he's not quite as athletic as Darren Waller. He's not going to wow you with his athleticism and be that big-time weapon that Waller was. I then look at the 4th-round pick out of Purdue, the quarterback Aiden O'Connell, and I say, well, he's not the most athletic dude, but he's also a guy that Josh McDaniels likes. So, as much as Michael Mayer could really help the team, maybe Aiden O'Connell is a guy that Josh McDaniels could help develop into what he's looking for in the next quarterback. Again, I have my doubts only because he's not that very athletic. He's not going to move a whole lot, but just as Coach McDaniels likes Michael Mayer a lot and likes what he brings to the table, maybe it's the same way when it comes to Aiden O'Connell. So, the defense has got to be better for the team to be better in 2022 or 2023, excuse me. It's got to be better than it was in 2022. And like I mentioned in segment number 2, they've got to be able to come up with turnovers to help the team out. They want to complement the team. Got to find a way to create some turnovers. Thank you so much for that call, my man. It's great to hear from you. Up next, got a text from Reno Raider Jeff. Come on, Q. Jimmy G is going to take us to the promised land, man. I wasn't a believer before, but here in Reno, a lot of my friends are Niner fans. The only season he wasn't injured, he took the Niners to the championship games. Also, we got, it says Michael Myers, but it's not Michael Myers. It's Michael Mayer, and Jimmy loves tight ends. Let's go, baby. This is our year. Reno Raider Jeff out. Just win, baby. And look, Jimmy G did take the 49ers to the championship games, but let's not make any mistake about it. The 49ers had a really good defense as well. They had a great run game and a really good defense. So I would be lying to you, because I wouldn't be lying to me, because I already know If it wasn't for the defense, would that 49ers team been in the championship game? Probably not. The one thing about Jimmy G, we know he's a good quarterback, but every game, at least once, he's going to give you that moment where you say, why, Jimmy? Why? Why did you throw that? And you're going to get frustrated and you're probably going to cuss him, but then you're going to get mad or you'll be happy when he makes another good play. I mean, he's a good quarterback. Injuries are always the biggest thing with him, and, he was part of that team that went to the championship game. I also sat in the stadium while the 49ers were taking on the Chiefs in the Super Bowl in Miami in 2020, and he overthrew Emmanuel Sanders where they could have won the Super Bowl, and he just couldn't hit Emmanuel Sanders, who was wide open, coming right at me. I'm sitting in the stadium there in Miami, sitting there, seeing the play coming right at me. I'm like, oh, that's game. That's going to be a touchdown. Emmanuel Sanders is going to not walk it off because there's still time left in the game, but that's a big-time play. That might seal the deal for the 49ers, and Jimmy G couldn't hit him. So there was a moment he had to get it done and really say he did it, and he didn't do it. But he's the Raiders quarterback, and as long as he's healthy, he does know Josh McDaniel's system. Maybe he does better and is a better quarterback and is more durable than I expect him to. But like I said, if I act like he's going to stay healthy all season long, I would just be ignoring the fact of what history has shown us about Jimmy G. But thanks so much for that text. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Little T from the 915. He's calling to talk about a potential schedule where Jimmy G gets hurt and what it would be like with the backup quarterbacks in. Here he is, Little T from the 915.
Hello, what up, Q? It's your boy Lil T from the 915. What up, Raider Nation? Hey, I just heard you in the back of my backyard, man. I wish I was there, but I'm a trucking Raider. I'm actually out in New Jersey right now. But I was wondering if you could do me a favor and redo a schedule where Jimmy G gets hurt after we beat the Broncos in week 1. Like I said before, man, it ain't a Raider game if your chest don't hurt. But take them out a good 3 weeks, put them back in. But if you put him back in too early, let's say, if you do 3 weeks, he's probably going to come back out again. I don't wish that on nobody, but it ain't a Raider game if your chest don't hurt. All right, Q. Do what you do, man. I've been following you since 2018. That's not going to stop, man. You're killing it, man. Keep doing what you do. All right, on.
Thanks so much for the call, my man. And, I was in your backyard, man. We spent the weekend in El Paso. Cousin Matt graduated from UTEP, so we went there. We flew out, late Friday night, got there basically early Saturday morning, and then we flew out on Monday morning. Got back to Vegas, Monday morning as well. So, I was only there for a couple days, but we were there. It's always great to catch up with family, and especially when Cousin Matt was graduating from UTEP. That's a big deal. So big ups to him. But I was there for a quick minute. We had a good time. Appreciate the shout out there. As far as Jimmy G and injuries, again, it's going back to the history of Jimmy G. It's just kind of who he is. I'm not going to go through the schedule and say, well, okay, he's going to be out after this week, or maybe, have him miss a couple games on purpose to try to stretch him out. No, you just look. You ride it until you can't ride it no more. You let him play until he can't play. If he gets injured, then he gets injured. And if he's out and Brian Hoyer's in or Aiden O'Connell's in, then most likely you have a really good chance of getting Caleb Williams or Drake May in 2024's draft, right? If he's going to miss a large amount of time, most likely you're going to be picking towards the top of the draft, or you're going to be sitting there in the top 10 of the draft, and then maybe you make a move to go get one of those quarterbacks that you feel like could be the quarterback of the future. But, again, it's just a crapshoot when it comes to Jimmy G because we know his history with getting injured, and it's real. Up next, got a text from Raider Rob in Southwest Florida. It said, Q, realistically, I see a 9-win season, and that's with Jimmy G playing the entire season. There's a huge drop-off at quarterback if he goes down, and I feel like the defense hasn't improved enough so far to keep games close for the backup quarterback. If they win 9 games and that defense improves from last year's 28th to, say, 20th, then I think everyone's job is safe for another year. Problem is, winning 9 won't get them a high enough position to grab a stud quarterback in next year's draft. They'll have to sell the farm to move up. Just my 2 cents. Go Raiders. That's from Raider Rob in Southwest Florida. And, that's the thing, that they could end up – there's certain teams, I feel like every year, that are bad enough to not make the playoffs and not be good, but they're not bad enough to end up picking super high, right? They're good enough not to make the playoffs or good enough not to pick super high. How's that saying go? Good enough to not pick super high, but not bad enough to, I don't know. You know what I'm trying to say. Whatever. It's late. So either way, they're stuck in the middle, right? Let's put it like that. They're stuck in the middle. They're not picking high, and they're not making the playoffs. So they're just kind of there, right? I think the Raiders were like that the year that they got Carl Joseph. Remember they picked like 14th overall? Like 14th is just kind of like no man's land. Anywhere between like 14 and 19. And, you know, even when they picked Garyon Conley in the first round, I think they picked 24th, right? I mean, it's just like, okay, 24th. Now you're a good team, but you're not that good of a team, if you know what I mean. So you really don't want to be in that. You either want to be really bad or you want to be in the playoffs and make a deep run, right? So we'll see. Again, I feel like the sweet spot for them is anywhere from 7 to 10 wins realistically. Because things could go really good. You can have a couple bounces go your way, and boom, you're all of a sudden you're sitting there at 10 wins. Or you can have a few of the games go against you like they did in 2022, and then you're sitting there at 6 or 7 wins and wondering, what the hell happened? What went wrong? So there you go. We'll see how it all shakes out. I think for the most part, unless this team shows a major regression, I do believe everybody's job will be safe for the following season as well, 2024. But that's just me. So thanks so much for that text. I do appreciate you. Got time for one more call. Jordan in Oregon, he's calling to talk about the schedule, and the Raiders have brings up the strength of the schedule and also what he thinks the season will boil down to when it comes to the silver and black. Here's Jordan in Oregon.
Hey, what's going on, Q? Jordan in Oregon. Wanted to call in, listening to your Monday's edition, and I had a few words I wanted to add to kind of the schedule overall. And, you know, I kind of peel it back, and a lot of it, you know, for our whole division, we play 12, I believe, common games. And so, you know, obviously, there's a bit of variance on strength of schedule on the remaining games, but you know, we were one of the last place. I believe we're tied for last in the division or third place in the division, so we should get the lesser of those. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Q, but a lot of the schedule is pretty similar for our whole division. So I always like to remind people that, because some people, I see the reactions like, man, we're getting hosed. And it's like, well, once you roll over to the Chargers schedule or the Broncos schedule or Chiefs, because they're all pretty daunting at first. But, you know, second thing I wanted to throw out there is my whole opinion on how this season shakes out is really going to come down to the point I made last week on your show when I called in is I think the Raiders as an organization have to dedicate to offensively is to keeping Jimmy G upright. And whatever that takes, if that means we're going to try to be a more physical team that runs the ball more often than not, and we're more of an obvious running team with two tight end sets, or whether that means it's just going to be a quick release thing. But you know, I think our whole season goes down to that. That's the biggest factor. And you know, when people are going through the wins and losses and where we're going to shake out, as you'd say, Q, I think it all really comes down to, did Jimmy get all 17 games in? Because if he does, I don't see why there's any reason we shouldn't be a little bit improved from last year. And what I mean by that is, let's not forget, you know, the continuity with Jimmy and Josh, but also just the team as a whole. We're not going into year one. Year two, whether you were a rookie that got drafted by this regime last year, or, you know, a guy like, let's just use Parham. Like, think about how much development strides he's made in that 1 year. So why are we not looking at that across the board of like, hey, all the guys that were on the squad this year, of last year, that are on the squad this year should make a jump as well. And so I'm not trying to get too optimistic. I think your window of 7 to 10 wins is really spot on. I mean, and I think anything less than that would shake out to be a bit of a disappointment. So appreciate it, Q. I hope you can on your radio show keep pushing my idea of they gotta keep Jimmy upright, man. If we do, we could be playoff team. Peace.
Jordan, thanks so much for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And as far as strength of schedule goes, the Raiders have the 3rd toughest schedule. The Chiefs sit there with the 5th toughest, Chargers with the 7th, and the Broncos is 9th. So the Raiders have the toughest schedule in the division, right? So, I mean, there's that. But that also, you have to take that with a grain of salt, because every team on the schedule, you know, you're basing that off of last year's win-loss record. So every team is not going to be either as good as they were last year, or they might not be as bad as they were last year, right? So, I mean, it's just a guesstimation. But right now, as it sits, the Raiders are sitting there with the third toughest schedule, Chiefs with the fifth, Chargers seventh, and the Broncos with the ninth. So we'll see how it all shakes out. I expect the Broncos to be better. They might not be better immediately week one, but by the end of the season, when the Raiders host them to close the season out, maybe they're a lot better, and maybe both teams are playing for a potential playoff position. Who knows? As far as Jimmy G, I mean, you're right. We've said it multiple times. Keeping him healthy is the key. How do you keep him healthy? You got to keep him upright. So the offensive line is going to have a lot of work to do. You know, I mean, Derek Carr wasn't a guy that was mobile. He wasn't running around moving, but he was pretty sturdy. You kind of knew that he was going to be there. You know, he was a guy that you knew was going to play all the time, where you feel like Jimmy G has a better grasp of the offense than Derek did. You feel like he's going to be able to do some things that Josh McDaniels wants him to do. You just have to be concerned about the history of him and injuries. So we'll see. It's not something that I want to be a storyline all season long, but it just kind of feels like it is. It's almost like you can't talk about Jimmy G without talking about the fact that he gets injured so often. And that, unfortunately, with any professional athlete, nobody wants to be known as the injury-prone guy. But unfortunately for Jimmy G, he's the injury-prone guy. So that's what I got for you for today's show. Jordan, thanks for that call. It's great to hear from you. Great feedback from everybody on today's show. I appreciate you. It's great to be back in the home studio and, not having to do the show from afar, and being back in Las Vegas as well. And got a lot more to get to throughout the course of the week here on the Locked On Raiders podcast, from more news and notes, players signing with the team, maybe potentially Marcus Peters. Of course, we'll get more calls and texts throughout that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, and we'll have a lot more good conversation. Had a really good conversation on my radio show on Monday with former offensive lineman Orlando Franklin, played with the Broncos and with the Chargers. And so got a few of those sound bites I might bring to the show tomorrow, because I thought he had some really good stuff to say about the Raiders-Broncos rivalry, how they wanted the Raiders week one. They got the Raiders week one. They're closing out with the Raiders week 18. So a lot of good stuff from Orlando, so I might bring that to the show tomorrow as well. But got plenty to get to all week long, and we'll do that here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, thanks so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you follow, subscribe, check it out on YouTube, wherever you check out your podcast. Make sure you check us out there. Thanks to my man Ari at Ari Producers for doing a fantastic job making sure we're up on YouTube each and every day. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.